running quickly in the wrong direction is a
Yeah.
bad thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can't afford to sit and wait, right? As
Yeah.
an organization, or your competitors are going to blow right by you.
Hi, Chris. Welcome to Drag and Drop.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. I know we've been probably talking since last year, but it'd be good to start with a bit of a introduction to yourself for those who may not know of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you talk about starting the conversation a year ago, this conversation a year ago would have looked very different
Yes,
had we
definitely.
recorded when you and I first started talking than today. But yeah, so for those of you, I've been with Siemens for about 8 years. I currently lead our partner program in the Americas, focused on the newly launched Intelligence Center X, which really combines the capabilities of Mendix along with our data and AI capabilities that have come through recent acquisitions. But my journey over the last 8 years has started actually as a manufacturing and engineer. So working with some of our industrial technologies, and prior to even Siemens, working with some kind of tier one, tier two suppliers in the automotive space. And from that way, Siemens is a company of acquisitions, found my way into the Mendix world after Siemens acquired them back in late 2018. And I've kind of been on that trajectory ever since. So started as a solution engineer working in some of our sales cycles, as well as our customer engagements with some of our largest enterprise customers in the space, kind of helping drive the initial adoption of Mendix into the Siemens industrial customer base and what product integrations on that front can look like. And then about 4 years ago, kind of moved a little bit out of the technical world and into the partner ecosystem world, which still keeps me engaged with partners that are on the forefront of delivering our solutions technically, but helping drive and build really a vibrant ecosystem that we have in the Americas. And really looking forward to scaling that, not just in the US. My responsibility extends to the zone. And so I have the pleasure of working with partners across, North and South America, which has been
Yeah.
a fantastic journey over the last 2 years.
And then talking about the Americas, obviously, Mendix is very mature in Europe, and a lot of people know of the platform, right? And obviously, I think in the Americas, there's still a bit of a you know, awareness gap. From your perspective, do you think that is primarily just the awareness gap, or is it a risk aversion issue or something, different in the US that enterprises just don't take it seriously because they're just so used to traditional software?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is in part an awareness gap, having the origins of not just Mendix, but of kind of this space with low code being
Mm.
European. I think there is that slow adoption, but more than just an awareness gap, I do think it is, structural or maybe even cultural in the way that U.S. companies think about being on the forefront of innovation at times, wanting to build things themselves with technology versus kind of outsourcing that to a platform style
Mm.
vendor. And so I see that, mentality in part shifting, especially as, the cost and timeline it takes to assemble
Yeah.
agentic platforms from scratch, is now costing significant time that you could be realizing value. And so I think it goes back to, ultimately cultural a bit in the US, just people wanting to build things themselves versus really, trusting an established platform.
Yeah, and I think that kind of even, you're talking about enterprises, but even that trickles down to developers, right? They just want to be writing
Yep.
code. They just don't want to be, they don't want to use the mouse. They want to be writing code as long as
Oh,
possible.
yes.
They're skeptical of literally anything else, right? They're kind of just in that mind frame. So I think it's the leaders, but also the developers who just don't want to accept it.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, especially, myself, first thing I, fell in love with, not coming from a software engineering
Yeah.
background, right? So in fact, my background, I had never written any full stack application development when I first was brought into the Mendix world. And just that excitement for touching the technology, working
Yeah.
with the technology, right? Feeling like, that I think in a sense is a good thing, right? It drives a lot of innovation. It drives a lot of focus on how can I become a master of the technology.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, too, I think that if we have to detach ourselves, that as technology, evolves, right, we also have to evolve in that, maybe as much as there's passion and drive for doing the details and doing the hard work and having my hands on every piece of
Yeah.
in line of code, that's maybe not the best organizational or efficient decision that we can make.
And, as someone who, you're obviously supporting partners in this agentic era where everyone's, trying to figure things out, and, when you're speaking to partners, but also from your own conversations, when CIOs and leaders are hearing the term low code, what assumptions do you feel they're still making that no longer is actually a reality?
Yeah, I think there's two, assumptions or stigma that are associated with the term, right? And for a lot of reasons, why I think, um, from a positioning perspective, we are moving and we need to be moving beyond that term, both
Mm,
because that is limiting in terms of what our capabilities are offering.
yeah.
But also, I think there is some assumptions that come in around low code in terms of the ceiling of complexity that it can
Mm,
handle, as well as the historical value that may have been attributed to low code is all about speed, right?
yeah.
And the reality is that, AI now is bringing infinite speed to the development process. And that's both whether you're using a traditional, full stack development layer, or you're leveraging a platform such as Mendix. And so, at the end of the day, if I think back to what is it at the reality when you think back why Mendix was built as a company and why this space originated. Yes, speed was a piece of that, right? Or the outcome was increased speed. But it was about just removing complexity and abstracting the complexity from what was a cumbersome and development process. And so I think if we shift that same mentality, what is it that we can now provide to the market, right? And how do we break beyond that assumption that low code was all about speed or low
Mm,
code has the ceiling, which, I do not believe to be a
yeah.
true statement. It's getting back to how do we abstract the complexity from that next layer of innovation and technology, and that is the agentic systems, and how do we help organizations become agentic enterprises?
Yeah. Do you feel these, these Gartner quadrants and, Forrester and obviously all the platforms for low code are on one, right? And there are some on there that have a ceiling and are more for internal.
Yeah.
And then there's the likes of Mendix who are kind of in the same table. So that just makes the assumption even that, okay, yeah, you're all pretty much the same with a few extra features here and there.
Yeah, I mean they have their benefit and they have their downsides when you talk
Yeah.
about the industry analysts. I think in some ways it helps provide visibility. It does help
Yeah.
provide executives that I talk to, in a very noisy and crowded space that is
Mm,
technology, right? Who are really the premier vendors that, I should be considering working with, just from even just a risk profile perspective. But they don't get everything right. I mean, it's really interesting if you look back, and I can't remember if it was Gartner or Forrester that originally was it like high productivity application
yeah.
platform, right? Like
Yeah.
originally, and so the naming, changes, it flows, and I think that's where ultimately, customers really need to think about, okay, what's the business outcome that this company is helping me achieve, and those business outcomes are different. For various different stakeholders, despite the fact, or various different platforms, I should say, despite the fact that an industry analyst may be attempting
Yeah.
to evaluate them on one common, criteria.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you have. I've been attending a lot of conferences in the last year that are all literally about AI, agentic AI, and leaders. That's all they want to kind of see and talk about. And many enterprises obviously saying they're doing AI, but most of them are kind of their initiatives are stopping at copilots and chat interfaces. What do you feel is the real difference between embedding AI into these applications and building agentic systems that can really act across workflows and systems?
Yeah, I think there's two primary differences. And the first, I think, comes down to separating personal productivity from process efficiency. I talk with all customers, partners, even my own internal team, and there's no doubt across every company that AI is making personal productivity higher. Right? Like
Yeah.
we are achieving more as individuals in our job. We're able to access information in a much faster way, but the reality is only one of those two between personal productivity and process efficiency actually drives a bottom line change when it comes to an organization's, financials. And so it's moving from, okay, how do I not just make my people more efficient? How do I make my processes more efficient, which is really, you think about bringing people and agents and having them orchestrated and working in harmony, right? It's not just one individual getting more productive and then maybe an agent's doing a task over here and it's making that small task productive, but I got to tie all of that together to really drive organizational efficiency. And so I think that's really the distinction of how do people move. The challenge is getting to organizational efficiency requires a lot of context and a lot of data for those humans and those agents to interact. And I really see that being the sticking point through conversations today. And it's been the same sticking point that we've talked about, a while, right? For history of just data, right? Trying to, how do we co-locate
Yeah.
data so that we have data visible so that we can make decisions on that data? And this ultimately, I think, still comes back to a data challenge, right? And it's now a new data challenge because bringing data together, right, may have allowed us to produce reports, produce dashboards, respond to defined questions very quickly. But in the world of AI, we're trying to respond to questions that are not predefined. In order to do that quickly and accurately, we need to have our data accessible in a way that it has context, that it understands our business, so that the business can now become more efficient.
And do you see a risk that, enterprises adopt these advanced AI capabilities faster than their teams, governance models and operating structures are really ready to support?
Absolutely. I think there's huge risk. Think we've seen that already. The countless examples, if you follow the media around organizations that have had AI where agents make decisions that have created, irreparable consequences to their business, or at least to their bottom line and their financials. And that comes in the way of agents or AI doing something that we can't walk back, right? And now we've created
Yeah.
a ripple effect across our organization. It also comes in the way of, spend, right? I mean, I think you follow the same, relative news circuits that I do,
Yes.
and you've seen the countless Fortune 500 companies that
Yeah.
have talked about blowing through their token consumption
Yeah.
budgets in, just a quarter or a half of a year, right? And so I think it's really important for organizations to think about, do I have the right governance models in place? Do I have the right controls in place? Because at the end of the day, it's not all about speed, right? Speed's great, but speed can take us in the wrong directions
Yeah.
very quickly. And then getting back on course is more difficult than had we just taken the time to put the right foundation, the right governance pieces in place to then be able to accelerate into the agentic.
I think definitely obviously speed's always been the focus, one of the main focuses where now it's more caution about speed, right? And kind of security governance and making sure, if you just rely on the speed, it could work out to be quite a disaster, no matter what platform you use.
Absolutely. Yeah. Running in the wrong direction really fast is still the wrong direction. And my concern is there's a lot of organizations, because of the market pressures, because of the technology pressures that are doing so versus really considering, how do I put a governance layer in
Mm.
place, right? And quite frankly, building that governance layer by yourself on your own, without technology vendors, without partners, without an ecosystem around you, is a very difficult and tall task to ask. Which is why I'm so excited about what the work that we do as a platform, as well as our partner community that I support, and how they help customers achieve outcomes, because it's ultimately all about the business outcomes,
Yeah.
but do it through the lens of governed and control, and how do we actually accelerate with AI.
And if enterprises don't rethink how they approach, low code and AI over the next, 1 to 2 years, what do you think they'll regret most looking back?
I think the two things that I see that enterprises might regret through my conversations with customers and partners is, one, the wasted time, the wasted effort, the wasted budget that went into running in the wrong direction. And the second is this idea of, okay, I assembled a bunch of point solutions that helped me create a little bit of efficiency with AI here, with AI here, with AI here. But I really didn't take kind of like a system architecture view or approach to how I was doing that. And so
Uh,
now I've just created the same challenge that we've been talking about with data forever is I have now have my AI and my agents in silos, right? And then eventually, if I'm going to continue to increase efficiency, to continue to increase my competitiveness, which is ultimately the goal of every organization
yeah.
and all of our customers, is I'm basically just creating this technical debt that's now existing in silos. And now I got to figure out how to all of a sudden now bring it together because the little bit of efficiency I gained was fantastic when I was gaining that in each silo. But I can't actually achieve, the scale of efficiency if I were approaching that in a comprehensive way. Which is where I think customers need to be a little bit cautious before spending so much on point solutions around the space of AI.
And talking about the product Mendix platform, what do you feel does Mendix both as a platform and an ecosystem still need to do to earn deeper enterprise confidence, especially in the US market, which is probably the hardest buying market in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're the biggest buying market in the world.
Yeah.
There's extreme potential, but as you mentioned, it's also a difficult buying market, especially given the noise, the amount of competitors that are in this space, as well as maybe some of the cultural things that we talked about at the
Mhm.
beginning of just how organizations want to go about things. I think for us, for our partner community, it's not just us as the technology vendor. It's how do we evolve from, being just so passionate about our technology, which we are, right? But really start to align that with the business outcomes that our customers can achieve and have achieved, right? And I see that playing out in a couple of different ways. How do we tell our stories better around the business outcomes that customers are achieving because of our technology? And looking forward to more opportunities for us to do that. I think it's really focusing in on the expertise that we as a company bring inside of specific domains. So if we think about Siemens, a long history inside of industry, leveraging that. And I think we've seen that in all of the excitement, all of the conversations I've had over the last week with the launch of Intelligent Center X. And we had massive amounts of great conversations with our customer at a recent customer conference because Siemens provides not just the technology, but really the industry view to help customers achieve what they want. But it's not just about industry either, right?
Yeah.
For us, that's my background, right? I'd love to talk to our industrial
Yeah.
customer base, but when I moved into this partner role, my eyes were open to the amazing work that our partners do with our technology across all industries. And so while Siemens may not be the industry expert in every area, it's interesting to think about what new areas Siemens can explore because of the
Mhm.
historical expertise we bring through some of our acquisitions. So I would challenge anybody to not just paint Siemens itself into that industry
Yeah.
bucket as manufacturing, despite that being our core competency, but the expertise that our partners also bring. And I mean, it's amazing to see, how and why a partner ecosystem is so valuable to our customers in order to help really provide that niche industry experience and really help the customer once again achieve the business outcome that we're after at the end of the day, and do it in a way that we believe is the right approach given our technology stack.
And Mendix has been vocal about moving beyond chatbots, and obviously Altair is clearly part of that story, right? So what does data context suddenly matter? Why does it matter more so much in the agentic conversation based to previously?
Yeah, I think it's everything. Right? I think the data context is absolutely necessary for achieving outcomes with AI. Think about the beginning when Chat GPT first came out, everybody's all excited, including myself, and
Yeah.
you start asking questions, and you're like, that's maybe not right, right? Like
Yeah, yeah. I think
one
it
plus
still does
one
that.
doesn't
Yeah.
actually one plus one doesn't actually equal three.
Yeah.
So I mean, but I think that is in of itself. And why did that happen? Right. Well, it happened because the data that was fed was either insufficient, or there were competing different sources of truth that it found, and it picked whatever the best guess that it found between it. And so the better we can ground our agents, our AI investments in our own business data, the better those outcomes are going to be towards our business. And that for me is why the strategy and the ability we have as a company with bringing together what Siemens, recently acquired from Altair with Mendix under this Intelligence Center X platform is so critical, right? Because it's
Mm.
setting up the foundational layer that is data, right? And that's continuing to leverage the investments that companies have already made over the last 15, 20 years in data warehouses and data lakes and data clouds, right? But it's now providing that business context, right? The word ontology gets thrown around in
Mm.
this space, but it's really being able to help provide a data map now to our agents and our AI for how do I go efficiently access the right information. And there's two pieces to that, right? It's the right information, which is absolutely critical, as we've talked
Yeah.
about. Why do you need the right information? But efficiently access that right information. That comes back to what we talked about before. What I think organizations will regret is wasted money, wasted spend,
Yeah.
right? And you think about how much more efficiently organizations can now and agents can access information when it's built upon a knowledge graph is tremendous. And that once again goes back to the governance and control of having a foundational platform in place versus just having, chat GPT agents that are out there running and doing their thing. And then the result is, as we've seen, companies that are overspending their annual budgets very.
Yeah. And talking about obviously, graph-based approaches, they're not new, right? But they're very critical now in this AI era, At a high level, what does graph-based foundations really unlock that traditional data access simply cannot?
Yeah, I think it unlocks, from my perspective, two things perhaps. One is that business context layer, right? I think that is so important. How much time has been spent between data scientists and business being able to determine, well, does that report actually tell the story that I'm trying to tell with my data? And so, predefining that business context is important for the data to actually mean something. So that I think that's the first thing, right? Having the knowledge graph. And I think
Yeah.
that's why knowledge graphs have been important, right? And have existed for 20 years. When you think about the rise of AI and agentic and speed now, and why I think these technologies finally coming together makes a graph-based approach to your data um, absolutely critical is that, in order to now be able to ask a question in real time that isn't, spent in the background creating these query reports and get an actionable answer today, like you got to have the data already preset in a way that it can be prepared for those questions. And that's where graph-based approaches, graph-based technologies, we're seeing customers with tremendous amount of value. Yes, they're taking some of the time, and actually AI is making the ability of creating ontologies in a graph-based ecosystem much faster. We're investing as an organization in creating kind of predefined ontologies, especially for our own products. But it's now giving businesses the context so that they can ask complex, non-predefined queries and through the graph get that information in real time to make a business decision and make that decision today, not just create reports.
And how does Mendix and Altair, complement each other to enable agentic application enterprises can actually trust in production?
Yeah, I think from that, we've seen it not just two separate technologies, the
Uh,
announcements around what we're doing with Intelligence Center X and bringing these products closer together and,
yeah.
ultimately, I think is really a combined capability to our customer. Is critical because I think that's where it goes from. Okay, we've all had these pieces of technology out there, from data to AI ML model development to application development, right? How do we create that full stack and make that full stack work as seamlessly as possible together so that we can accelerate the outcomes, for our customers? And that's really where this is so critical to customers, because whether or not they're embracing a technology vendor such as Siemens that actually brings all of these together in one
Uh,
governed comprehensive platform, or they're out there building it themselves by compiling and integrating three or four other different technologies, you have to have these foundational layers of ability to have context on your data, applying intelligence on top of that with your own models that, yes, are powered by underlying LLMs, but that are tailored to your business. And then ultimately, you got to do something with that intelligence, right? You got to put that
Yeah.
intelligence to action. And that's by the creation of agents and the creation of processes that are much more efficient, orchestrating humans and agents working together as a hybrid workforce. And so, for us, I think this is not really necessarily, is yes, it's a product strategy from our perspective to bring these things together. But it's also a market demand in order to achieve
Yeah.
the business outcomes in the world of AI that you have to have data interacting with the intelligence and interacting ultimately with the action layer.
Yeah. And if enterprises skip, the data and context layer and jump straight into agents, what typically goes wrong?
Rework, lost time. um, I think it goes back to that same thing. I think you will ultimately achieve some positive impact or can
Mm,
achieve positive impact, but there's a ceiling to that productivity that you can achieve. If you're able to then work with, if you don't have business wide context, I'll say, and you just have a little bit of context that you're feeding into your chat interface or into that particular agent, it's gonna make that individual task much more efficient. But I go back to this notion that, ultimately, if we how do we drive bottom line impact for our customers, we got to make the organizations and the processes more efficient, which means we need our agents, and we need not just agents, but we need our humans as well to be able to interact with the context that's across our entire data landscape, across our entire organization. And so that's where I see, as much as things can go wrong because wrong data will ultimately lead to
yeah.
wrong outcomes with AI. Same way it does with humans, right? Uninformed
Yeah.
humans make wrong decisions all the time. But we also miss out on all the upside and all the potential that AI has to bring if we don't actually have context to our data, and then we try to automate without it.
I'm interested to know because obviously you mentioned, it's a big space you're in now, right? Everyone's, in this space trying to kind of bring out the latest features, the next best thing, but from an existing customer standpoint, right? And just based on conversations I've had with people, as much as they love the thought of it, is there pressure from existing customers? Obviously you need to keep kind of competitive with the market, but is any of that pressure coming from the existing customer base for you to kind of implement these things as quick as possible?
Absolutely. And I mean, I would expect nonetheless from our
Yeah.
customers, from our partner. I mean, we want to make our technology as useful to you as we can. And so that feedback, that pressure, in fact, helps drive, right? Because I mean, we don't want to, as an organization, ever, sit here and think that we somehow know everything about the market,
Mm,
where it's heading, and all the world should just listen to us, right? That sounds wonderful, but
yeah.
reality is, customers know what they need for their own
Yeah.
business. And so that pressure is quite helpful, or at least that's what I tell myself when I talk to the product team,
Yeah.
that the pressure I'm helping apply to them from our partner ecosystem is helpful because it's what customers need to ultimately drive their business outcomes. And so that's what I'm excited to keep listening, keep hearing from the customer and the partner community.
Yeah. And yeah, touching, and you touched on it before, but why do you think, partnerships are becoming even more important for client success as, the platform keeps evolving?
I think it goes back to the expertise in two different ways, right? You ultimately, as an organization, and I believe this to be true with our partners, like we want our customers to have a sense of ownership and a sense of investment as well as a skill within our technology stack, right? So I think that ability of having partners in the room and jointly with customers owning outcomes, partners and customers together is critical. But I think partners now become even more critical because of the speed pressure that organizations are on. And how do I get quick value, quick wins, begin to not just set the foundation, but accelerate my return on investment with my AI as quickly as possible? you need to partner with organizations that have done this with other that are
Mhm.
similar to you, that understand sometimes your business better than maybe you do, or point out some blind spots that you may have. And so that combination of technology skill from day one with the right platform, as well as the industry knowledge, is why I think partnerships are so important to our client success, and why, for us, I think, and all the customers that I talk to with our partner community, why it's really important to kind of have all three parties invested in the outcomes: the vendor, the partner, and the customer.
Yeah. Yeah, and how do partners and solution providers leverage technologies, such as Mendix or others, need to think about evolving their own business in this AI era?
Yeah, I think, evolving is the right word to use there. I think AI is forcing all of us to evolve how we do work, what are our business model. I think it's unlocking huge potential. That's what we obviously see through results. But I see that same thing with our partners, right? And I see this notion as well, in the need for partner community, or people that are working with technology itself, to move beyond just being a technologist, and highly skilled in technology. And like, that's important. I don't want to discount the fact of how important it is to have the right people with the right skill on the technology, but making sure that you're equally as tied to kind of the business outcomes that the technology is driving, understanding those business outcomes, being able to be more consultative to your customers and to our mutual customers around the business outcomes they can achieve, and maybe pointing out, as I mentioned before, some of those blind spots that customers have around their own businesses, because you as a partner actually have expertise within that domain or within that industry, depending on, what the use case may be. So that's how I see our partners, already evolving, right?
Uh,
But also the need for all of us to continue to evolve and become closer to our customers, closer to the outcomes, and more expert in our client's business than just the technology.
do you feel, because obviously we're kind of doing, we do training and things like that, and do you feel a lot of the partners need to, obviously they invest in their teams and knowledge in the platform, how to sell the platform, how to position the platform, but they also need to, enable their teams to know what else is out there so they can really compare and show a customer that, okay, you've seen all these shiny
Yeah.
things on the in the market, but actually this is how it compares. Because I find a lot maybe go all in on the platform they're selling, and they don't really upskill enough on the market, right? And that can be a level of confidence with an enterprise, can really kind of drop that. Okay, these people just have one hat on, and that's it.
Yeah, see that as tremendously valuable, right? I mean, I see that valuable to me being on the vendor side, in
Mm,
terms of the market intelligence that partners can help bring by interacting with other technology. But I also see it as very valuable and consultative to customers, right? To say, no, we've been hands on with two or three technologies, and, while, yeah, there's value with all of these technologies in this layer, what you're missing is, it lacked this, right? And I see this a lot today. Had very numerous conversations with various partners in our community around, you know, vibe coding and some of the
yeah,
the agentic IDs that are out there. And in fact, actually, I had a partner owner recently call me, like, "Hey, I just had a developer, basically build something," and they're like, "It took me no time."
yeah.
And then the question was like, "Okay, fantastic, but then how do we move that from just a proof into production? How do we scale that to enterprise? How do we mitigate the risk?" And so, for a defined use case, that technology may have been sufficient, right? But if we bubble that up, right, to what are all of the potential use cases that your organization have, it requires a level of governance, a level of control, and a level of broader technology features and functions that not all platforms have. And so I think that's where, partners can be valuable in pointing out some of those areas that customers may
Uh,
not be considering if they're, focusing on evaluating two or three different technologies in an isolated use case scenario.
And talking about the evaluation process for customers and conversations you're having with partners, and things I've heard as well from other partners that I speak to. because of this noise and this space and everyone kind of pushing to be in this space, do you, is the feedback from partners that the sales cycles are much longer and just, enterprises are kind of hesitant to hit go because there's just so much going on and so much movement where they're taking longer to commit?
I think we see it in two different areas. I think in some senses, it's almost like maybe a widening gap in sales cycles, right?
Yeah.
In some areas, we're actually accelerating our sales cycles significantly because of our ability to kind of prove business outcomes to clients faster, right? To
Mm,
gain that trust, and then be able to accelerate. So, and then on the other hand, I do think maybe from a customer that isn't really willing yet, right, or isn't
yeah.
quite right there to even trust when you've proven the business outcome or
Uh-huh.
the ROI to them, that, yeah, I'm just going to wait on this because of the
Yeah.
noise I'm hearing,
Yeah.
that it can kind of delay things. Now, I think there's two things, right? I talked about before that, running quickly in the wrong direction is a
Yeah.
bad thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can't afford to sit and wait, right? As
Yeah.
an organization, or your competitors are going to blow right by you. And so I think we're at one of those moments in time with technology that before there's always a cost to no decision. I'll
Mm,
talk to that with our teams. Um, but that cost of no decision right now is, I think, increasing
mm.
significantly. And so while yeah, I see some sales cycles elongating, some sales cycles shrinking. Ultimately, the market is moving faster, right? And I think that's what really excited about is how can we begin, to produce business outcomes faster, which we're already seeing.
Yeah. And talking about, developers and architects and conversations around will AI replace them, part of them, in their roles, you know, what do you think they should be thinking about with their careers as the platform is shifting from, app centric delivery to more
Yeah.
agentic centric systems?
So I'll go back. I mean, my schooling was engineering, mechanical engineering,
Yeah.
and I've found my way relatively far away from what most mechanical engineers do on a day to day basis. But the one thing that I still believe from that style of education that has been important is this idea of problem solving, right? And systems level thinking. And I think that is where we are, no matter, what scope you play inside of a development team today or other technology, of if you approach your career, your own team skill set with problem solvers and people that can abstract the complexity or move one layer up the value chain in systems level thinking, I think that's where people will move, right? And it's not a matter of will AI replace some developers. Yes, I mean that's the notion. I mean, we've seen the
Yeah.
productivity from AI. You won't need as many people on maybe the
Mm,
development, writing code front. The reality is, like, if we're going to continue to drive business, we need those people in other areas of the business. And so, being able to apply that same skill, right? It's not even knowledge. You may have knowledge of how to write code in a particular language or leverage a particular platform like Mendix. But how do I, apply my skills to actually a new higher level challenge, which now we have in terms of kind of agentic systems and agentic orchestration?
And, finally, obviously things are kind of evolving so fast. And like you said, from when we spoke to when we're speaking, when we first spoke to now, so much has changed just in that space, For you, what are you kind of most excited about, and looking forward to as things are kind of evolving at the moment?
Think what I am most excited about is seeing the innovation that customers and clients and partners can achieve by embracing technology with the right governance and guardrails in place. I mean, I started before, like, I've been blown away when I moved into the partner ecosystem, the innovation, the skill, the capabilities our partners have to drive various projects, in industries that I'm even unfamiliar with. And I think
Yeah.
that's what's exciting. I mean, that at the end of the day, that's why technology exists, right? Technology exists in order to power a better future. And we're seeing that accelerated. And so I'm just really excited to see 3 or 4 different kind of technologies come together. Now, for us inside of kind of Intelligence Center X, that's, the abilities we have with graph, with AI
Yeah.
modeling, and with Mendix from an application delivery perspective to see that. But ultimately, what I see that doing is driving, innovation and efficiency at our customers much faster than we ever could before. So I mean, that's really exciting to just see, um, what companies can produce, what companies can do when they embrace technology and our own technology in an effective way.
And like you said, it's just a exciting time in general to kind of just see how, technology is just changing it like it never has, right? So it's really kind of evolving in a way that, we both have kids. By the time they're working, this will just be normal. They're not going to be going through any change.
Yeah, I mean, you have that same thing from generation to
Yeah.
generation. You talk to your parents about what
Yeah.
life was like before X, or your
Yeah.
grandparents before what life was like before X. That's going to be shrank. We're going to go through three or four of those. What was
Yes.
life like before whatever?
Yeah.
And I was contemplating myself on that. Like how difficult was it to do some of the things that I'm doing today
Yeah.
before I had AI in my
Yeah.
in my world,
Yeah.
right? And so it's just amazing to see what technology can do when properly applied. And so I'm really excited for what the future was. Obviously, there's always risk associated, and I
Of
think
course.
that's why we as a company and our partner community can help provide those right guardrails. But it's an exciting future for everybody that is in this space. And I'm excited to be a part of it as well.
Definitely. Well, thanks, Chris. It was a pleasure to speak to you. And I think we should definitely, as things will change, I'm for sure, we should speak again in the future, keep in touch. And, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me.
Absolutely, would love to do that as well. And yeah, we'll see what the next 12 months holds for
Yeah,
us. But I
definitely.
mean, I know if it's I know it'll only be more than what's already planned
Yeah.
from our company.
Yeah.
But I'm all excited about what that already is.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic. Thanks for asking.